Mark, thank you very much for joining us on
Pleasure.
Happier Talk. So Mark, tell me, you work with Action for Happiness, and you touch many people's lives. What do you find are the particular things, one or two things that move people, that help them become happier, where they come back and say, this changed the way I do things?
Thank you. So Action for Happiness is this sort of movement of people that have this shared conviction that happiness matters, not just to us personally, but in the way we behave and the choices we make. And I think my answer to your question about what makes a difference is I think actually that realization that our happiness is not just a personal quest, it's an interconnected experience. So when we see our happiness as linked to others, linked to some kind of greater purpose, then we discover this just amazing energy, motivation, and ability to cope when things go wrong. So we have, for example, volunteers that step forward and try and bring some of these great happiness ideas, lots of your great ideas, and spread them in their communities, in their schools, in their local environments. And that's something magical happens when people get together and have conversations that matter.
So I'm hearing actually two misperceptions about happiness that you're helping to rectify. One of them is that happiness is all about me.
Yeah.
Whereas, happiness is about sharing, probably the number one determinant of happiness.
From me to we, as we say sometimes, yeah.
And the second thing is also that cultivating our happiness also helps us better deal with difficulties and hardships. So it makes us more resilient.
I think that's really interesting, and I think that when we often see people coming to this, people who especially want to spread the word and take this to others, there's a sort of naive assumption in the rest of the population that this is some privileged, I'm happy all the time because I have a good life. Actually, what I see is stories of pain and suffering and loss and the real stuff of life. But instead of leading people down a path of sort of despair, that they discover that actually that there is an element of choice. It's easy to say happiness is a choice. It's quite hard to live it, but people can find, even in the face of loss and terrible adversity, this amazing courage to say, the way I behave to my neighbours, the way I am in my workplace, the way I am with my children, the way I treat myself, and we can be so hard on ourselves. That stuff is life-changing when you get it right.
Yeah. So you get together in groups and people talk about their pains, they share their sorrows as well as their joys. What tools do they go home with? What practical things can they do?
That's a great question, and we're called Action for Happiness, not talking about happiness. And this is a really important distinction, which is lives only change when we change our behaviours. But anyone who's studied behaviour knows that it's really hard to change. So how do you get people to actually shift? One is this sort of sense of helping people refocus on what really matters. So you get away from it's about the material wealth and the consumption and realise that actually it's about relationships and purpose. But still you've got to sort of operationalise that in some way. How do I actually make that real in my life? So when we have, for example, our 8-week Exploring What Matters course, at the end of each session there's a very clear, and what are you going to do this week? And who are you going to come back and tell about it next week? So everyone leaves that session with I'm going to reconnect with an old friend. I'm going to go and visit that lady across the street who's been lonely. I'm going to just practice mindfulness this week, and then come back and tell someone about it the next week. So over time, over week by week, you're building habits that last.
So you give them homework, or rather home play.
Yeah, home challenge that is often more enjoyable than they were expecting it to be.
That's terrific. Well, Mark, thank you very much for the work that you do and for spreading happiness.
Yeah, thank you, Tal.
Thank you.